Okay, so we want to welcome everyone to our Facebook Live. It's a weekly event, actually. I'm Vincent McCory, and with me here at the Voice of America studios is reporter Salem Solomon. And today we want to continue, as we started last week, our conversation about the African migrant crisis. Today, though, we want to focus on the business of trafficking, because it's a really big issue that is often overlooked by many people out there. So I want you to join our conversation. Let us know what you think should be done and can be done first to stop this flow of migrants to Europe and elsewhere, but also the tragedy that we keep facing.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
and the trafficking and smuggling of people across the Mediterranean, specifically the Mediterranean, is worth between $300 million and $600 million a year. It's a lucrative business, unfortunately. And so we would like to get into what that looks like and what our sources tell us. Some of our sources that we speak to, witnesses who were rescued. So
because most of our viewers many times are aware of the process, the journey. Like these people take off, let's say, from Libya or from Egypt, and then they know that the boats oftentimes capsize, like the one that just did capsize last night, Wednesday night in Egypt.
600, carrying 600 people.
Yeah, and people die. But that angle of the business side, that actually there are people out there who are making millions of dollars from these very desperate people trying to cross over. And we're talking about people who are running away from misery and poverty.
That's right.
But they have to produce thousands of dollars in order to get somebody facilitate their travel across the desert, but also their voyage on those rickety boats. And you've gotten some information on this, that actually even some of those people are probably never anywhere near either Libya or Egypt or the Mediterranean.
No, they're not. In fact, you raise a very good point about how shocking this is, because these smugglers and traffickers, let's say, once they know that how vulnerable these refugees or migrants are, and they see what kind of connection that they have, let's say, with families abroad. So that means, there's a potential for them to raise money and send them. Or sometimes you see, migrants or refugees working in a third or second country prior to, embarking on another journey. And so they work menial jobs for years and years, but they don't make that annually. We're talking about per trip, $2,000. I'm talking about US dollars. This is per head. And so if you're looking at these rickety boats filled with, like what you just witnessed in Egypt, 600 people
600, not
per
tiny
head,
boat,
it's $2,000 per se.
Per person.
Per
600
person.
times 600, $2,000 by times 600 US dollars on the average.
Yeah, and that's not considering what it takes them or how much money they spend to get to that point. Prior to trying to go to Europe.
So for us, when we see these people trooping to these areas, we see misery, we feel mercy, but someone somewhere is counting money, and they see the business side of it. What I realized is that those very same people, actually, they operate like business people, and therefore they market this. They are very instrumental in promoting the idea that, you should go to Europe, you should try out, because there is a lot of good that can happen to you. And so all you need is to just raise the money. Raise the money. So they're actively promoting this, because for them, this is business.
Yeah, and one thing about traffickers, because of the lucrative nature of this business side of it, so you would have one big boss of a huge network of people. Even at lower level, they need the demand. They need people to come and ask, are you going to help us leave or go to this place, or just facilitators per se. And so they have bosses that take care of only the boats, let's say.
That's right.
And then they invest in these boats, and they take commissions from these functionaries. Well, be it in Libya, be it in Sudan, they have functionaries all over the place. And so they get cuts and from what our sources tell us, some of the sources that we've spoken to. And so it trickles down to some extent, but the big money goes to these big bosses. In fact, last Wednesday, it's a case of mistaken identity. He's an air chain smuggler who was extradited from Sudan to Italy. They're still,
I know
the
we
case is ongoing.
Big time on that, you know.
Yeah. And he is originally from my country, and it's a disputed case where they thought they got the guy, and it's still ongoing. It's still going to be, it's on trial. They're going to have him again in court in November 16. But the bottom line in terms of business side of this is they would give these boats. These boats are invested by the big bosses. And so part of the reason why European Union is also investing in Sophia operation is once they rescue these migrants, they burn down these boats because they don't want them to be reused
back
again.
And you know, it is an invisible structure, kind of an informal. You could say informal because we don't have it registered somewhere.
That's right.
But there's a system there, and as you mentioned, I mean, there is the big bosses, but in between there's a whole line of people, operatives.
Line of network.
So sometimes when they arrest somebody like these 4 guys in Egypt on the boat, that's just a crew.
Yeah.
Some guys will get just a little
functionaries.
pay. Functionaries.
Basically.
Some of them are those who actually will take the boat up to some point and just jump off.
Exactly.
And they get their little, pay, and they go home and feed their
And
family. But the real big guys, are somewhere in some really cushy places. It reminds me, to some degree, of course, we have a drug trade worldwide, which has so many invisible actors, but it reminds me actually of the business structure of the piracy that became a big issue on the Somali coastline. Many people saw the pirates. They saw those fellows who go into the ship and take control of that ship, but the guys actually who are demanding the 5 million ransom, usually they'll be like really wealthy guys who are based in Nairobi, Kenya, or somewhere.
Located, of course.
Exactly.
They don't want to do the dirty work.
Yeah.
And so they just enjoy the money that comes with it. And so you see the same thing here in the migration crisis as well. And it's unfortunate because most of them are exploiting the most vulnerable. We were talking about, let's say, for instance, we see during these rescue missions, mothers and children, and you wonder, where are they getting this money from, and how is it getting funneled? Because from prosecutors or people who follow this, who even government officials or crime, tracking agencies that I've spoken to, they say they don't have any, legal means of wiring these money, the money, and so they have this system called hawala, or they have something that's not traceable, like a formal way of doing it.
So it's like it's passing from some people to some, someone to someone to someone.
Yeah. One example I can bring up here is, let's say, was it last month or the month before, there was a big bust on a perfume shop in Italy. It's a small perfume shop where people could come in and go. You see like what kind of produce that they have or products that they have in their shop. It's not really that luxurious, but a lot of people come in and go, and some, I think they had a hidden camera and they started following it, and they were able to get a lot of money from the shop, and they connected it with smugglers and traffickers that were using this shop as a means of contact to send money from Italy to
some other place.
And so it is an international.
The other very disturbing way of actually raising funds is something that came out of Egypt recently. They discovered that actually some of these desperate migrants are being lured into the illegal organ sales.
That's true.
Where those guys come and say, you need to raise about $2,000. You don't have it. You have no way of having it. But you know what? You have a kidney. You have 2 kidneys. You don't need both. You know, we can give you $2,000. Give us the kidney, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, and this has been going on for quite a while.
And it's done in a very crude way, right?
That's right. We mentioned it last time during our Facebook live session. But what they do, in fact, the recent case of organ trafficking that we've seen is 3 families just discarded at the shores of Egypt, Somali families. It was the pictures were very gruesome. You can see, as I said, the cuts were very clear that someone who's trained in medical field
wouldn't do it, or unless they're doing it in a hurry. Some of these people maybe.
It seems like from previous reports that we've seen that there is some sort of medical training.
No. They say my researchers revealed that actually there are medical practitioners involved. There are doctors and there are nurses who are involved in this syndicate because they get this for $2,000, but remember they're gonna sell it to somebody who needs it desperately for $10,000. So there is a criminal syndicate in Egypt, for example, where they have discovered that you can actually get easy kidneys, sometimes by force. Some of these guys actually are kidnapped, and they're just forcefully, I don't know if they sedate them even, but tie them down, they cut them up. And
it's very cruel business. In fact, one Italian prosecutor I spoke to used to crack down on the mafia in Italy, but now because of the lucrative business of migrants and how he's using the expertise that he had tracking down the mafia to track down these smugglers.
It's similar, everywhere where there's big business, their operations will start looking similar. And the big bosses become as vicious as the other drug lords, mafia lords, pirates, and all that. The greed for the money makes them as vicious as the other ones. So we just want to remind our viewers that up to 100,000 Africans will try to cross the Mediterranean and to Europe, and we're talking about by the end of this year.
That's right.
Now, a great number of those, there's a big number out of the 100,000 that will end up dying.
That's right.
They're dying every day. Sometimes people don't realize that some of these boats capsize like every day, and sometimes you lose 200, 500, 300. Up to this point, over 3,000 have died.
First half of 2016, over 3,000 people have died, and out of the 3,000, over 2,000 of them are not accounted for. And these are, we're talking about names and faces of people. When we're saying 2,000, 1,000, one person's life is too much. But and so it shows you the gravity of the nature of things right now. And last time I think we talked about what the world leaders are trying to do, and there's a business side of that too. What world leaders are trying to do to fix this, because there's large numbers of migrants and refugees coming to these places. I think they're trying to also cut money to fix this problem at this point. In fact, just this week at the UNGA, the United Nations Assembly, there was a huge money commitment. 50 states and organizations are committing 4.5 billion, including 1 billion from the U.S. Just to solve this. So what does this mean? What is this money? How is this money going to be implemented? And these are the things that we have to think about. One example I wanted to share with our viewers and everyone is that so the mafia, for instance, organization in Italy, have figured out that they could take money from the state so that they can create these resettlement places.
That's ingenious.
And so it's
that is ingenious.
It's incredibly shocking to see and understand that there needs to be transparency in the way that these projects are implemented. This is just one example I'm raising.
And so we have to remember the 100,000 people we mentioned, all of them travel through smugglers. And so it is a big business, because nobody can make it to those boats. Nobody gets on those boats without the help of smugglers. And therefore, it's a big business. But I just wanted to just read some of the
Okay.
comments of, from our viewers, because
Okay.
you know, viewers have different ideas about migration and the migrant crisis. John from Tanzania, for example, says he believes that Africans should persevere and make their countries better. See, he says we should remain in our countries to correct what we see is not right. Now, you know, that is debatable. Everybody has their own thoughts, but he has that's his point of view.
Yeah, I would like to add to his point of
Yeah.
view. Let's say, for instance, when we say smugglers and traffickers, these are two different group of people. Smugglers sometimes, in, let's say, a system. Think of it from the U.S. perspective during slavery time. When somebody's breaking the law, because it was the law, doesn't mean that they're breaking the law because the law was good. You know, there are systems in African countries where there is authoritarian regimes where people are breaking free of a system that oppresses them.
Yeah.
So these are the push factors that we talked about last time. And so smugglers help them to free themselves from
And some are
an
grateful.
oppressive.
We have to acknowledge that some
Exactly.
people have been very aggressive. And I have to say, John from Tanzania, I am from Kenya, for example. We
Yeah.
don't have many people trying to flee from Kenya or Tanzania. So we also have to be empathetic to those who come from extremely oppressive systems.
Exactly.
We cannot really walk in their shoes, but
Yeah.
we know that there are strong push factors.
Exactly.
And for some of them, it's worth the risk of death.
That's why these terms, like when we say smugglers, is very important. When we say refugees, it's very
Refugees,
important.
yeah.
Refugees don't have a choice.
Yeah.
Refugees leave the country
just
because
have to.
they're pushed out because
Exact.
of war.
War.
They're pushed out because something is broken in the system that they cannot return.
Yeah.
But migrants might have
Someone may
you
just
know,
choose because I think I
because
want to
a
try
lack of
better.
employment.
Yeah.
It's still, it doesn't
still a-
it doesn't mean that they're not running away from something that's pushing them. It just means that the option of coming back, the choice is available.
Yeah.
I think we have to be very careful about wording these things when
Yeah.
we say even smugglers. But traffickers would have, like the mafia we talked
Yeah.
about, or the organ smugglers
Yeah.
or organ
Those
traffickers.
are
They deliberately torture people.
yeah.
They deliberately abuse people so
Yeah.
that they could take money from the most vulnerable people.
Yeah.
And so I think understanding what these terms mean is very
Because some of
important.
the smugglers actually have been even taking risks personally to help people through deserts and other places. As we end up, come to the close of our conversation, I also wanted to just read this one comment from Nyamwea. He's from Kenya. He says, the problem is African leaders have failed to develop their countries, plundering the little resources, enriching themselves, and leaving the masses poor and with little hope for progress.
Yeah,
We mentioned that last time.
There's a lot of bad examples.
Yeah.
In fact, last time when I was talking off the top of my head, I said 50 countries. So of course, there are like newly elected officials across the continent. But if you really think about it, newly elected doesn't mean that they're bringing new
ideas and new
it's
systems
probably
and
the
all.
same
Some of
person
us
running
are-
again.
yeah.
So we have a lot of bad examples that
The culture has to change.
it has to change.
I mean, I've been around for some time to know that new leaders, opposition coming to power has not been a solution. I've seen the opposition come and get worse than the former party and all that. It's just the culture has to change, and hopefully leaders have to stop being in denial. They just have to acknowledge that there are things that have to be fixed to make people be proud of their continent, of their countries. You can't just tell people to be patriotic when you're enjoying all the resources, you and your family members,
Exactly.
and they're languishing in misery and poverty and also living in fear and sometimes, being tortured. You can't tell people, love your country, stay home. We have to be realistic. You know
Yeah.
what, time? We can always talk
Yeah,
about this
since
for
we're
a
talking
long
about
time.
also the business side of it, accountability of how the money is allocated in these countries. When Western countries make a cut to these African leaders, I think being accessible and accountable to their own people and answering questions when people are asking or demanding things, I think is very important from the business side of African countries.
Otherwise, if you want to be a little bit to feel like you're sovereign nations, have some arrogance and pride, how about try to fix things? Fix the countries, fix the resources, stop all the corruption, everything, and then you can stand along with other leaders instead of being beggars and constantly being told what to do.
Dependent on
You can
others.
be the people who determine the future of your country.
And we
the
have
continent.
all the
We
resources.
do have. Anyway, I want to thank you all for being with us, spending some time with us again and following us on Facebook. This discussion, as we said, will continue. So let me know what you think and what other issues you think we should address on our Facebook Lives and even on Africa 54, the live show. So remember, we'll be anytime you can drop a message on Africa Facebook page, and also you can send me a tweet, and that is at VOA Vince McCory. So from Washington, D.C., we wish you a good night.
Good night.
Thanks, Alan.
Thanks for having me.